What would you do if everything you held dear was threatened by a powerful enemy hiding in the shadows? In this gripping tale, twin brothers Darren and Caleb find themselves locked in a life-or-death struggle against a ruthless gang led by the enigmatic Royce. With their sister Mia taken hostage and their every move under surveillance, the brothers must rely on their wits, their bond, and an unshakable determination to expose Royce's criminal empire. Along the way, they'll face harrowing battles, daring escapes, and a final showdown that could change everything. Stay tuned to uncover the twists, betrayals, and high-stakes drama that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And before we dive in, let us know where in the world are you watching from? The invitation arrived on an ordinary morning. Darren and Caleb, twins in their early 30s, were enjoying breakfast at their modest home when a black envelope was slid under their door. Inside was a single card with bold letters: "Your past meets your future. Fight to win or lose it all. Details to follow." Caleb frowned as he held the card. What kind of sick joke is this? Darren's jaw tightened. This isn't a joke. Look at the crest. He pointed to the bottom corner of the card, where a snake coiled around a spiked fist. The symbol was unmistakable. It belonged to the Iron Order, a notorious underground group with a history of violence against minorities. Their father, who had tried to expose the group years ago, had died under mysterious circumstances. Caleb shook his head. No way. We're not getting involved with them. We left all that behind. Before Darren could respond, their younger sister, Mia, burst into the room. Guys, there's a car outside. Black SUV. They've been parked there for hours. Darren and Caleb exchanged a look. It was clear the Iron Order wasn't giving them a choice. Later that day, a second message came, this time as a text on Caleb's phone: "If you don't participate, your sister pays the price." The brothers were left with no option but to comply. They called the number in the text and were told to arrive at an abandoned warehouse at midnight. That evening, Darren tried to reassure Mia. "We'll figure this out. Just stay home and lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone." Mia hesitated but nodded, her eyes filled with worry. When midnight came, Darren and Caleb arrived at the warehouse. The entrance was guarded by masked men who silently led them into a dimly lit arena. The crowd was loud and chaotic, with spectators shouting bets. Darren and Caleb were handed matching black uniforms and gloves. A man stepped forward from the shadows. He introduced himself as Royce, one of the leaders of the Iron Order. Royce's smile was cold and calculated. "Welcome to the arena. You're here because you've been chosen, and the rules are simple: fight and survive." Darren clenched his fists. "We're only here because you threatened our family." Royce smirked. "And that's what will keep you fighting. Good luck. You'll need it." As Royce walked away, Caleb whispered, "What's there? Endgame? This can't just be about us fighting." Darren shook his head, his gut telling him there was much more to uncover. The announcer's voice boomed. "Let the first match begin." Darren and Caleb exchanged a glance. Whatever this was, they'd face it together. The roar of the crowd was deafening as Darren and Caleb stepped into the center of the dimly lit arena. The air was thick with tension and the smell of sweat and metal. Darren scanned the audience, noticing the smug faces of spectators eagerly placing bets. These weren't ordinary fights, they were entertainment for a group that thrived on control and humiliation. A voice echoed through the space, snapping Darren out of his thoughts. First match, Darren and Caleb versus Thorn. A man stepped into the ring, towering and covered in tattoos, his fists wrapped in thick tape. His cold eyes locked onto the twins, a sinister grin spreading across his face. Thorn was no ordinary opponent. He moved with the confidence of someone who had fought countless battles. Royce's voice rang out from the edge of the arena. "Let's see if the famous twins can survive." Darren clenched his fists, leaning toward Caleb. "Stay on his left. He's leading with his right shoulder, it's a feint." Caleb nodded, keeping his posture loose. Got it. Watch his footing. He's too heavy to move quickly. The bell rang, and Thorn lunged forward with terrifying speed for a man his size. Darren sidestepped his first strike, narrowly avoiding a blow that would have floored him. Caleb swung low, aiming for Thorn's knee, but the man countered with a sharp elbow, forcing Caleb back. The crowd jeered and cheered with every move. Darren could feel their hatred. The way their shouts seemed to feed off the idea of seeing them lose. "Come on, boys," Thorn sneered, his voice carrying over the noise. "Is this all you've got?" Darren dodged another strike, then landed a quick jab to Thorn's ribs. The man barely flinched. Caleb tried to sweep his leg again, but Thorn grabbed him by the arm and threw him to the ground. For a brief moment, Darren froze. Thorn's strength was overwhelming, but they couldn't afford to lose, not with Mia's life on the line. "Focus," Caleb shouted from the ground, scrambling back to his feet. Darren took a deep breath, reassessing Thorn's movements. He noticed something, a slight hitch in Thorn's left leg every time he pivoted. "His left knee," Darren called out. The twins shifted their strategy. Caleb distracted Thorn with quick jabs, while Darren circled to exploit the weakness. Finally, Darren landed a sharp kick to Thorn's knee, sending the man stumbling. The crowd roared louder, their excitement teetering on bloodlust. Thorn growled in frustration, charging at Caleb. Darren seized the opportunity, delivering a devastating blow to Thorn's injured leg. The man crumpled to the ground, unable to rise. The bell rang. The fight was over. Darren and Caleb stood in the center of the ring, their chests heaving, bruises already forming. The crowd erupted in boos, clearly disappointed by the outcome. Royce approached the ring, clapping slowly. "Impressive. I didn't think you'd last around." He leaned in, his smirk widening. "But this was just the beginning. Enjoy your little victory while it lasts." As Royce walked away, Darren helped Caleb to his feet. "This isn't just about us fighting," Darren murmured. "They're testing us, but for what?" Caleb winced, holding his side. "Whatever is, we need to figure it out fast. They'll come at us harder next time." Back in their assigned quarters, the twins found an envelope waiting for them. Inside was a photo of Mia, tied to a chair in a dark room. Written beneath it were the words, "Win or she disappears." Darren's grip tightened on the photo. "We're getting her out of this no matter what." Caleb nodded, his expression grim. "But we need to stay alive first." As they prepared for the next match, questions loomed in their minds. Why was the Iron Order forcing them to fight? What was Royce planning? And most importantly, how far were they willing to go to protect Mia? The photo of Mia haunted Darren and Caleb as they sat in their dimly lit quarters. The room was silent, except for the hum of a faint generator somewhere in the building. Darren turned the picture over in his hands, studying every detail of the background. "Look here," he said, pointing to the corner of the image. "There's a shadow bars on the window maybe. She's being held somewhere with locked windows. Could be a warehouse or an old factory." Caleb nodded, pacing the room. "That doesn't exactly narrow it down. This whole operation feels like it's in the middle of nowhere." Before they could discuss further, a loud knock interrupted their conversation. The door creaked open, and a man with a shaved head and a scar across his cheek stepped in. His eyes scanned the room, cold and calculating. "Get up," the man barked. "Royce wants to see you." The twins exchanged a quick glance, but complied. They followed the man down a long corridor lined with other locked doors. Muffled voices and occasional shouts echoed faintly, reminding them that they weren't the only ones trapped in this nightmare. Royce was waiting in a larger room at the end of the hallway, leaning casually against a desk. Behind him, monitors displayed various angles of the arena, the corridors, and even the other fighters' rooms. It was clear that Royce had eyes everywhere. "Impressive performance last night," Royce said, his tone dripping with mockery. "But I'm curious, how far are you willing to go to keep winning?" Darren stepped forward, his jaw tight. Let Mia go. She has nothing to do with this. Royce laughed, shaking his head. You think I'm going to give up my leverage? Not a chance. You fight, you win, and she stays alive. It's that simple. Caleb clenched his fists, but Darren placed a hand on his arm, silently urging him to stay calm. Royce stepped closer, lowering his voice. You see, this isn't just about the fights. It's about control. People like you need to learn your place. Darren's eyes narrowed. People like us? Royce smirked, his eyes gleaming with malice. Your kind has been pushing too far, too fast. This arena reminds everyone where the real power lies. And if you think winning a few fights changes that, you're naiver than I thought. Before either twin could respond, Royce gestured to the monitors. One screen showed Mia sitting in the same dark room as the photo. Her head was down, but she appeared unharmed. You want her back? Royce continued. Then you keep fighting. But here's the catch, your next match isn't just about survival. You'll need to make a choice. Royce handed them a small folder. Darren opened it to find profiles of their next opponents. Two brothers, much like themselves. These two? Royce explained. They're fighting for their family too. Only one team will move forward. The other, well, let's just say their sacrifice will be remembered. Caleb's voice shook with anger. You're forcing us to destroy people just like us. You're sick. Royce shrugged. It's survival of the fittest, my friends. If you want to save Mia, you know what you have to do. The twins returned to their quarters, the weight of Royce's words pressing down on them. Darren tossed the folder onto the table, his mind racing. They're doing this on purpose, he said, pitting us against people we'd normally fight alongside. It's not just about controls, it's about dividing us, making sure we stay enemies. Caleb leaned against the wall, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. What? If we don't fight? Darren shook his head. Then we lose Mia, and you know Royce will make an example out of us. Caleb's fists tightened. We need a plan, not just to survive, but to bring this whole operation down. Darren nodded, his gaze hardening. First we win, then we find Mia, and when the time is right, we'll show Royce and his people what real strength looks like. As the arena lights flickered on for the next fight, Darren and Caleb knew they were stepping into more than just a match. They were entering a game designed to strip them of their humanity. But they had no intention of losing, not to Royce, not to the Iron Order, and not to the system they represented. The arena buzzed with anticipation as Darren and Caleb stood on one side of the ring, their faces shadowed by the dim light. Across from them were the profiles from Royce's folder. Two brothers named Sam and Eric, younger but just as determined. The resemblance was striking not just in their physicality, but in the desperation etched into their expressions. Royce's voice boomed over the speakers. Two pairs of brothers, both fighting for family, for survival. Only one team leaves the ring tonight. Let's see who's willing to do whatever it takes. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Darren barely heard it. His focus was on Sam and Eric, who exchanged a quick nod before stepping forward. You don't have to do this, Darren said, his voice cutting through the noise. There's another way. Eric, the older of the two, narrowed his eyes. You think we want to fight you? They've got our little sister. If we lose, she's gone. Caleb's heart sank. We're in the same boat, but fighting each other isn't the answer. Sam shook his head, his voice tinged with frustration. You think Royce cares what we think? If we don't fight, they'll kill all of us. We don't have a choice. Before Darren could respond, the bell rang, and the fight officially began. Sam and Eric lunged forward, their movements quick and calculated. Darren and Caleb sidestepped, avoiding the initial strikes. This isn't right, Caleb shouted, as he blocked a punch from Eric. You think I don't know that? Eric growled, landing a sharp kick to Caleb's side. Darren dodged Sam's strikes, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the thought that Royce was watching from the shadows, reveling in the chaos he'd orchestrated. As the fight progressed, It became clear that neither side wanted to deliver a fatal blow. Sam hesitated before every strike, his eyes darting to the crowd as if searching for approval. Eric's movements were powerful, but lacked the ruthless efficiency Darren had seen in their previous opponents. "They don't want this any more than we do," Darren muttered to Caleb as they regrouped during a brief pause. Caleb nodded, wincing from the kick he'd taken. "So what do we do? If we hold back too much, Royce will know." "Then we give him a show," Darren said, his voice low. The brothers launched into a series of coordinated attacks, not to harm, but to create the illusion of a fierce battle. Caleb swung at Eric, intentionally aiming wide so the younger man could dodge. Darren engaged Sam in a flurry of punches, each narrowly missing its mark. The crowd roared louder, oblivious to the subtle dance unfolding in the ring. "Nice moves," Sam whispered, his breath ragged. "We're not here to kill you," Darren replied quietly. "But we need to end this before Royce catches on." A plan formed in Darren's mind. "Caleb," he called, "sweep left." Caleb feinted a low kick, giving Darren the opening to knock Sam to the ground. Sam hit the mat hard, staying down as if he were out cold. Eric's eyes widened in alarm. "Sam!" "Stay down," Sam hissed under his breath. Realizing the ploy, Eric threw himself at Caleb, allowing Darren to grab him from behind in a mock chokehold. The bell rang, signaling the end of the fight. The announcer declared Darren and Caleb the winners, and the crowd erupted in applause. As medics rushed in to check on Sam and Eric, Royce appeared at the edge of the ring, his smirk widening. "Interesting strategy," he said as Darren and Caleb stepped out of the arena. "But don't think I didn't notice the hesitation. Next time I want to see blood." Darren stared at Royce, his jaw tight. "You'll get your show, but one day, you'll answer for all of this." Royce chuckled. "Careful, Darren. Defiance doesn't suit you." Back in their quarters, Darren and Caleb collapsed onto the bench. Caleb pressed a bag of ice to his ribs, wincing. "That was too close," Caleb said. "Royce knows we weren't fighting at full strength." Darren nodded. "But we bought ourselves some time. Sam and Eric are alive, and we're still in the game." Caleb frowned. "What about Mia? If Royce figures out we're stalling, she's the one who'll pay the price." Darren's gaze hardened. "Then we find her before that happens. Royce wants to play games? Fine. We'll play, but we'll make sure he doesn't see the end coming." The night after their fight, Darren and Caleb sat in the corner of their cramped quarters, the tension in the air palpable. Caleb adjusted the ice pack on his ribs, while Darren leaned over the photo of Mia again, studying every detail like a puzzle waiting to be solved. "There has to be something we're missing," Darren muttered. "Some clue about where they're keeping her." Caleb, exhausted, leaned back against the wall. "And even if we figure it out, how are we supposed to get past all of Royce's goons? They're watching us every second." Darren didn't answer immediately. Instead, he flipped the photo over again, hoping the answer would reveal itself. That's when he noticed something, a faint reflection, in the window bars in the background. "Wait," Darren said, narrowing his eyes. "Look at this." Caleb sat up, squinting at the photo. The reflection was faint but distinct. It showed a streetlight with a broken bulb and the corner of a rusted metal sign. "That's got to be a location," Caleb said, his voice rising with hope. "Do you recognize it?" Darren shook his head. "No, but it's something. We just need to figure out where it is." Before they could dig deeper, the door creaked open, and Royce's scar-faced enforcer stepped inside. His gaze was cold, and his words clipped. "Royce wants to see you. Now." The twins exchanged a glance, then followed the man down the same dark corridor as before. Royce was waiting in the surveillance room, his arms crossed and a smug grin on his face. "Good evening, gentlemen," Royce said, gesturing to a screen. "I thought you'd like to see this." The monitor flickered to life, displaying a live feed of Mia. She sat in the same room as before, her head leaning against the wall. Her face looked pale but determined. "She's tougher than I expected," Royce said, his tone mocking. "But I wonder how long she'll hold up if you keep testing my patience." Darren took a step forward, his fists clenched. "If you hurt her," Royce held up a hand, cutting him off. "Relax. I'm not the one you should be worrying about. You've got another fight tomorrow, and this one won't be as forgiving as the last." Caleb crossed his arms. "And if we win? What happens then?" Royce smirked. "You'll keep fighting. That's the game after all. Or did you think there was an easy way out of this?" Darren forced himself to stay calm. "What do you want from us, Royce? Why go through all this trouble?" Royce's smile faded, and his expression turned cold. "Control. Order. People like you need to understand your place. And this arena is the perfect reminder." The word stung, but Darren didn't let it show. Instead, he memorized every detail of the surveillance feed, the lighting, the walls, the faint sound of machinery in the background. Royce's enforcer stepped forward, motioning to the door. "Time's up. Back to your room." As they walked back, Darren leaned close to Caleb and whispered, "Did you hear that hum in the background? Machinery. She's near some kind of factory or plant." Caleb nodded. "And the reflection in the photo, there's gotta be an old industrial area nearby, with a broken street light and rusted signs." Darren's mind worked quickly. "If we can figure out where she is, we'll have to move fast. Royce is watching us like a hawk." Back in their quarters, Darren began sketching a rough map of the city from memory, marking potential locations where an old factory might line up with the clues. They had. Caleb kept watch near the door, his ears straining for any sign of movement. As the hours passed, Darren tapped the pencil against the table, his frustration mounting. "There are too many possibilities. If we pick the wrong place, we lose precious time." Caleb suddenly snapped his fingers. "Wait, remember that time we drove past the old mill on Edgewater? It had a broken streetlight out front, and the whole place was fenced in." Darren's eyes lit up. "That's gotta be it. We'll check it out tomorrow after the fight." Caleb frowned. "If there's a fight tomorrow, they'll have every guard on high alert. How are we supposed to get out without raising suspicion?" Darren smirked, though his expression was grim. "We'll make them think we're too focused on surviving to be a threat. But when the time is right, we're getting Mia and bringing this whole operation down." The next morning, Darren and Caleb sat in their quarters, silently preparing for the day's fight. Their plan to locate Mia was clear, but the challenge was getting through the match without raising Royce's suspicions. Caleb tightened his gloves, his jaw clenched. "We make this look real. No holding back this time." Darren nodded. "Agreed. Royce needs to believe we're desperate enough to focus solely on surviving." The enforcer arrived, leading them back to the arena. As they entered the ring, Darren's sharp eyes scanned the crowd. Royce stood in his usual spot, leaning against the rail with a smirk. It was clear he thought he had total control. Their opponents were already waiting, a pair of fighters who looked like seasoned brawlers, their faces scarred from countless matches. Darren and Caleb sized them up quickly. "These guys don't mess around," Caleb muttered. "Good," Darren replied under his breath. "Let's give Royce the show he's expecting." The bell rang, and the fight erupted. The twins moved as one, their years of training evident in their fluid movements. Darren deflected a punch aimed at his head, countering with a sharp jab to his opponent's ribs. Caleb spun to avoid a kick, retaliating with a precise strike to the man's knee. But their opponents weren't amateurs. They pressed hard, forcing the twins to stay on the defensive. Darren took a hit to the shoulder, the impact jarring but not enough to slow him down. The crowd roared, their cheers blending into a chaotic hum. Royce watched intently, his eyes narrowing as Darren and Caleb began to gain the upper hand. "They're too coordinated," Royce murmured to his enforcer. "Let's see how they handle a curveball." At Royce's signal, the arena's overhead lights flickered. A loud buzzer sounded, and the gate at the far end of the ring creaked open. Darren and Caleb froze as a third fighter entered the arena, a massive figure with a chain wrapped around his fist. The crowd erupted in excitement, sensing the imbalance. Great, Caleb muttered. Because this wasn't hard enough already. Darren gritted his teeth. Stick to the plan. Focus on survival. The new fighter charged, swinging the chain with brutal force. Darren ducked just in time, the chain whistling past his head. Caleb lunged forward, aiming for the man's legs, but the chain-wielding opponent was faster than he looked. He sidestepped and delivered a crushing blow to Caleb's back. Caleb hit the ground hard, gasping for air. Darren immediately moved to shield his brother, deflecting another swing with his forearm. The impact sent a sharp pain shooting through his arm, but he held his ground. Get up, Darren hissed through gritted teeth. Caleb staggered to his feet, his vision swimming. I'm good. Let's finish this. The twins adjusted their strategy, using their speed to outmaneuver the larger fighter. Darren feinted left, drawing the man's attention, while Caleb struck from behind, landing a solid kick to his knee. The fighter stumbled, and Darren seized the opportunity to knock him down. With their opponents subdued, the bell finally rang, signaling the end of the match. The twins stood in the center of the ring, battered but victorious. Royce clapped slowly, his smirk returning. Impressive. I almost believed you were outmatched. Darren glared at him but said nothing. He and Caleb exited the ring, walking straight past Royce without a word. Back in their quarters, Darren grabbed the map they'd sketched the night before. It's time, Darren said. We need to move now while they're still focused on the fight. Caleb nodded, wincing as he adjusted his stance. What about the guards? They'll be watching the exits. Darren pulled a small piece of fabric from his pocket, revealing a makeshift slingshot he'd crafted from scraps. We create a distraction. Moments later, the twins slipped out of their quarters, moving carefully through the dimly lit corridors. Darren aimed the slingshot at a stack of crates near the far end of the hallway and released the projectile. The crates toppled with a loud crash, echoing through the building. Go! Darren whispered. The twins moved quickly, heading toward the rear exit they'd scouted earlier. As they neared the door, Darren spotted a lone guard patrolling the area. Caleb grabbed Darren's arm. I'll handle it. Be ready to run. Before Darren could protest, Caleb stepped forward, deliberately making noise to draw the guard's attention. When the guard turned, Caleb tackled him, pinning him to the ground. Go! Caleb shouted. Darren hesitated for only a moment before slipping through the exit. Outside, the cool night air hit him like a wave. He scanned the area, spotting the broken streetlight and rusted sign from the photo. This has to be it, he muttered, heading toward the nearby industrial building. Behind him, Caleb appeared slightly, out of breath, but unharmed. Guards out cold, he said. Let's find her. The twins approached the building cautiously, their senses on high alert. Inside, the faint hum of machinery grew louder, confirming their suspicions. Stay quiet, Darren whispered as they moved deeper into the building. As they rounded a corner, Darren froze. In the distance, he saw a faint light spilling out from a room with a heavy metal door. Mia's in there, he said, his voice trembling with determination. Darren and Caleb crept closer to the metal door, their footsteps light against the concrete floor. The hum of machinery was louder now, mingling with the faint sound of voices from inside. Darren motioned for Caleb to stop and pressed his ear to the door. She's still breathing, a gruff voice said. But Royce wants her to stay that way until the twins are out of the game. Caleb's fists clenched, his face taut with anger. Darren placed a hand on his shoulder. Keep it together, he whispered. We'll get her out. Darren scanned the area, noting a camera mounted above the door. He nudged Caleb and pointed at it. Caleb nodded, pulling a small piece of fabric from his pocket. He quickly wrapped it around the camera lens, obscuring the view. We don't have much time, Darren said. Caleb grabbed a nearby pipe and wedged it under the door's latch, using it as leverage to pry the door open. The lock groaned in protest, but after a few tense moments it snapped. Inside, The room was dimly lit by a single hanging bulb. Mia sat in a chair in the center, her wrists bound and her head slumped forward. Darren rushed to her side, his heart pounding. "Mia," he said softly, kneeling in front of her. "It's us. We're here." Mia stirred, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw Darren and Caleb, relief washed over her face. "You found me," she whispered, her voice weak. Caleb quickly untied her wrists, while Darren checked for any injuries. "Are you okay?" Caleb asked. Mia nodded faintly. "They didn't hurt me, but they said if you didn't keep winning." Her voice trailed off, trembling with fear. Darren gently helped her to her feet. "We're getting you out of here. Stay close and don't make a sound." The three of them moved toward the door, but as they stepped into the hallway, a shout rang out behind them. "They're here." Two guards rounded the corner, their footsteps echoing in the industrial space. Darren and Caleb instinctively moved to shield Mia. "Run," Darren hissed to Mia, pushing her toward the opposite direction. Mia hesitated, but Caleb grabbed her arm. "Go now." She took off down the hall, glancing back with wide eyes as Darren and Caleb faced the guards. The first guard lunged at Darren, swinging a baton. Darren sidestepped, grabbing the man's wrist, and twisting it until the baton clattered to the ground. Caleb, meanwhile, faced the second guard, who charged with a raised fist. Caleb ducked under the punch, countering with a swift elbow to the man's ribs. The guard stumbled, and Caleb delivered a final blow, knocking him out. Darren turned to Caleb, breathing hard. "We can't hold them off for long. Let's move." The brothers sprinted after Mia, catching up with her near an emergency exit. Darren shoved the door open, and the three of them burst into the cool night air. They didn't stop running until they reached the edge of the property, where a dense line of trees offered some cover. Mia collapsed against a tree, her breath ragged. "We can't go back to the car," Caleb said, scanning the area. "They'll be swarming it by now." Darren nodded, his mind racing. "We'll have to stick to the forest and find another way out." Mia clutched Darren's arm. "Royce won't let this go." He said he had eyes everywhere. Darren crouched in front of her, his gaze steady. "Let him come. We're not going to let him win." As they moved deeper into the forest, Darren couldn't shake the feeling that Royce was already a step ahead. But for now they had Mia, and that was enough to keep them going. The forest was dark, the thick canopy overhead blocking most of the moonlight. Darren, Caleb, and Mia moved as quickly as they could, their steps careful to avoid snapping twigs or rustling leaves. Behind them, faint shouts echoed through the trees, a chilling reminder that Royce's men were closing in. Mia clung to Caleb's arm, her breathing uneven. "How do we outrun them? They know this place better than we do." Caleb glanced at Darren, who was leading the way. "We don't outrun them. We outsmart them." Darren paused, crouching behind a fallen log and motioning for the others to do the same. "Listen," he whispered. "They're tracking us by sound. We need to create confusion." Mia nodded, though her hands trembled. "What do you have in mind?" Darren pulled a handful of rocks from the ground. "We split up for a moment, make noise in different directions. It'll slow them down. Caleb and I will circle back and regroup with you here." Mia's eyes widened. "Split up? Are you serious? What if they catch us?" Caleb placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "They won't. We'll draw them away. Trust us." Before Mia could argue further, Darren handed her a small flashlight. "Turn this on once we're clear. It'll signal us where to find you." Mia hesitated, but finally nodded. "Be careful." Darren gave her a faint smile. "We always are." Moments later, Darren and Caleb darted in opposite directions, deliberately snapping branches and tossing rocks to create noise. The shouts of their pursuers grew louder, splitting as the men followed the false trails. Caleb ducked behind a tree, peering out to see two men passing by, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. He held his breath until they were gone, then doubled back toward the meeting point. Meanwhile, Darren moved stealthily through the underbrush, his sharp ears catching snippets of conversation from two other pursuers. "They can't have gone far," one of them muttered. "Royce said not to come back without the girl," the other replied. Darren's jaw tightened. He picked up a heavy branch, tossing it into the distance. The sudden noise sent the men running in the opposite direction, giving him a chance to slip away. Back at the meeting point, Mia crouched low, clutching the flashlight in one hand. Every rustle in the forest made her heart race, but she forced herself to stay calm. When Darren and Caleb finally emerged from the shadows, her relief was palpable. She turned on the flashlight, waving it briefly before shutting it off again. "Did it work?" she whispered. Darren nodded, his voice low. "For now, but we need to keep moving." Caleb knelt beside her, handing her a canteen. "Drink. You'll need your strength." Mia took a sip, her hands still shaking. "What's the plan? We can't run forever." Darren glanced around, his mind racing. "There's a service road about a mile east of here. If we can get to it, we might be able to flag someone down or steal a vehicle." "Steal a vehicle?" Mia asked, raising an eyebrow. Caleb shrugged. "Borrow. Permanently. Whatever it takes." They set off again, moving east. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, the trees pressing in on all sides. The faint hum of distant engines told them Royce's men were using vehicles to patrol the area. Suddenly, Caleb stopped, holding up a hand. "Wait, do you hear that?" Darren froze, straining his ears. A faint buzzing sound grew louder, cutting through the stillness of the night. "Drones," Darren whispered, his stomach sinking. Mia's eyes widened. "They're using drones to track us." "Royce doesn't mess around," Caleb muttered. "We need to find cover fast." Darren scanned the area, spotting a cluster of large boulders near a shallow ravine. "There. Go!" They sprinted toward the rocks, crouching low as the buzzing grew louder. Moments later, a drone passed overhead, its searchlight sweeping the forest floor. Mia pressed herself against the cool stone, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "What happens if they see us?" Darren didn't answer. Instead, he kept his eyes on the drone until it disappeared into the distance. "We move now," he said firmly. "Stick to the shadows." The trio reached the service road just before dawn, the first rays of sunlight cutting through the trees. They hid in the brush, watching as a single truck rumbled down the road, its driver oblivious to their presence. "That's our chance," Caleb said. Darren nodded. "Mia, stay low. Caleb, you're with me." The brothers stepped onto the road, waving their arms to get the truck driver's attention. The vehicle screeched to a halt, and the driver, a middle-aged man with a scruffy beard, leaned out the window. "You boys lost?" he asked, eyeing them warily. "Something like that," Darren said, keeping his tone calm. "Our car broke down a few miles back. Think you could give us a ride into town?" The man hesitated, glancing at Caleb. "Where's your car?" "Near the old mill," Caleb replied. "We just need to get to safety." The man nodded slowly. "Hop in the back, but make it quick." Darren and Caleb helped Mia into the truck's bed, then climbed in after her. As the vehicle pulled away, Darren exhaled in relief. "We're not safe yet," he said, his gaze fixed on the forest receding behind them. "Royce won't stop until he finds us." The truck bounced along the uneven road, the hum of the engine blending with the faint rustling of leaves in the early morning breeze. Darren, Caleb, and Mia sat silently in the back, the tension between them as thick as the dust trailing behind the vehicle. Mia broke the silence, her voice low. "Do you think Royce knows we're gone yet?" Darren, his eyes scanning the road behind them, nodded grimly. "He knows. And if I'm right, he's already mobilizing his people to find us." Caleb leaned against the side of the truck, his fingers drumming against the metal. "So what's the plan? We can't keep running forever." Darren reached into his pocket, pulling out the folded map they'd sketched in their quarters. "We get to Maria. She's the only person we can trust to bring Royce down. Mia frowned. Maria? Who's that? A detective, Caleb explained. She's been investigating Royce's operations for months. She's got the resources we don't. But we need evidence, Darren added. Proof of what Royce is doing. Otherwise, he'll walk away, like nothing happened. The truck slowed, pulling onto a gravel path that led to a small gas station on the outskirts of a quiet town. The driver parked, hopping out to refuel. He glanced at the trio in the truck bed. This is as far as I'm going, he said. You're on your own from here. Darren gave him a nod of thanks. We appreciate the ride. The three climbed out, their feet crunching on the gravel as they made their way toward the gas station. Darren scanned the area, noting the lone attendant inside and the deserted road stretching out ahead. Caleb leaned close. How do we get to Maria from here? There's a bus depot about 3 miles west, Darren replied. We'll head there and figure out the rest. As they walked along the empty road, the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the landscape. Mia stumbled, and Caleb caught her arm, steadying her. You okay? He asked, concern in his voice. Mia nodded, though her face was pale. Just tired. And scared. What if Royce finds us before we get to this, Maria? Darren stopped, turning to face her. He won't. We'll make sure of it. You've been through enough, Mia. We're not letting him take you back. Mia gave him a faint smile. I trust you. They continued in silence until they reached the bus depot, a small, rundown building with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign. Darren approached the ticket counter, where a bored clerk barely looked up from his magazine. 3 tickets to the city, Darren said, sliding cash across the counter. The clerk punched a few keys on his terminal and handed over the tickets. Bus leaves in 10 minutes. Gate 2. The trio boarded the bus, settling into seats near the back. Mia leaned against the window, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. Caleb sat beside her, while Darren kept watch, scanning the faces of the other passengers for any sign of trouble. An hour into the journey, Darren's phone buzzed in his pocket. He frowned, pulling it out. The screen displayed a message from an unknown number. You can't outrun me. Caleb noticed the shift in Darren's expression. What is it? Darren showed him the screen. Royce. He's taunting us. Mia's eyes widened. How does he know where we are? Darren's mind raced. He could be bluffing, but it's also possible he's tracking us. He glanced at his phone. This could be compromised. Without hesitation, he powered off the device and tossed it into his bag. Caleb leaned back, his jaw tight. If he's tracking us, we need to move faster. Maria might be our only shot at staying ahead of him. The bus arrived at the city terminal just after noon. The trio disembarked, blending into the crowd as they made their way through the bustling streets. Darren led them to a small cafe on a quiet corner, where Maria had agreed to meet them. Inside, the air was warm and filled with the smell of fresh coffee. Darren spotted Maria in a booth near the back, her sharp eyes scanning the room. She stood as they approached, her expression both relieved and tense. You made it, she said, motioning for them to sit. Barely, Caleb replied, collapsing into the seat. Maria's gaze flicked to Mia. This must be her. Mia nodded, her voice soft. Thank you for helping us. Maria's expression softened. You're safe now. But we need to act quickly. Royce's reach is bigger than I anticipated. If we don't stop him soon, he'll disappear, and so will any evidence against him. Darren pulled the map from his bag, spreading it across the table. We think we know where his central operation is. An old industrial site near the arena. If we can get there, we might find the proof we need. Maria studied the map, her jaw tightening. That's risky. But if you're right, it could be the break we've been waiting for. She looked at Darren and Caleb. Are you sure you're ready for this? Once we make our move, there's no turning back. Caleb met her gaze, determination burning in his eyes. We've come this far. We're not stopping now. Darren nodded. Royce thinks he can control everything. It's time to prove him wrong. The old industrial site loomed ahead, its rusted structures and broken windows a stark reminder of its forgotten past. Darren, Caleb, Mia, and Maria crouched behind an abandoned truck, surveying the perimeter. Guards patrolled the area, their movements methodical, while faint voices carried through the crisp evening air. "This is it," Darren whispered, his breath visible in the cold. "Royce's central operation." Maria adjusted her earpiece, signaling her backup team stationed a few blocks away. "We go in quietly, gather evidence, and call in the raid. If we rush this, Royce slips away." Caleb checked the tools in his bag, a pair of lockpicks, a flashlight, and a small camera. "What if things go sideways?" Maria's jaw tightened. "Then we improvise. But Royce can't walk away from this." Mia tugged on Darren's sleeve, her voice trembling. "I should stay here." "If something goes wrong, no," Darren said firmly. "You've come this far. We're not leaving you behind." Mia hesitated, but nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. The group moved carefully, sticking to the shadows as they approached the building. Maria used a small device to jam the exterior cameras, giving them a window to slip inside. Once inside, the air was heavy with the scent of oil and metal. The faint hum of machinery reverberated through the walls. Darren led the way, his sharp eyes scanning for anything that could confirm Royce's crimes. They passed a room stacked with crates labeled as industrial supplies, but Maria's sharp gaze caught something unusual, a hidden compartment in one of the crates. She pried it open, revealing a stack of files and a flash drive. "Bingo," she whispered, slipping the items into her bag. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the hall. Darren motioned for everyone to hide, pressing against the wall as two guards walked past, their conversation casual but ominous. "Royce says we're moving everything tomorrow," one guard said. "Cops are sniffing around too close." "Good riddance," the other replied. "This place gives me the creeps." The guards disappeared around a corner, and the group exhaled in unison. "Tomorrow," Maria murmured. "He's already planning his escape." "Then we have to stop him tonight," Caleb said. The group reached the central office, where Royce's operations were coordinated. The room was filled with monitors displaying surveillance feeds, maps of the city, and lists of names, targets, payments, and transactions. Darren grabbed a folder from the desk, flipping through it. His stomach churned as he recognized names from their neighborhood, people who had vanished or been attacked. "This is it," Darren said, his voice tight. "Everything we need to bring him down." Maria began photographing the evidence, while Mia kept watch by the door. But just as they were about to leave, the sound of a gun being cocked froze them in place. Well, Royce's voice drawled from the shadows. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Royce stepped into the room, flanked by two heavily armed guards. His smirk was colder than ever. "I have to admit I didn't expect you to get this far." "Impressive, really." Maria raised her hand slowly. "It's over, Royce. We have everything we need to take you down." Royce chuckled. "You think a few papers and a flash drive will stop me? I have people in places you can't even imagine. You'll never make it out of here alive." Darren's jaw tightened. "That's where you're wrong. You've underestimated us before. Big mistake." Royce's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered. "Maybe, but it's your move now. Let's see how far you're willing to go." Darren glanced at Caleb, who gave a subtle nod. In one fluid motion, Darren lunged at Royce, knocking the gun from his hand, while Caleb tackled one of the guards. Chaos erupted as Maria and Mia dove for cover. The fight was brutal, but quick. Darren and Caleb's training gave them an edge, and within moments, Royce's guards were incapacitated. Royce scrambled to his feet, backing toward the door. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice trembling with anger. "No," Darren said, stepping forward. "You will." As Royce tried to flee, Maria's backup team burst into the building, their weapons drawn. Royce froze, his hands raised as officers surrounded him. Maria stepped forward, her badge gleaming. "James Royce, you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and incitement to violence." Royce glared at her, his defiance flickering. "You think this change anything? Someone else will take my place." Maria's gaze was steely. "Maybe, but not today." Outside, the cool night air felt like freedom. Darren, Caleb, and Mia watched as Royce was loaded into the back of a police van, his empire crumbling behind him. "It's over," Mia whispered, tears streaming down her face. Darren put an arm around her. "Yeah, it's over." Maria approached her expression, softening. "You three did good tonight. None of this would have been possible without you." Caleb smirked. "Guess we're not so bad for a couple of troublemakers." Maria chuckled. "Don't get cocky. The fight isn't over, but you've earned a break." As dawn broke over the city, the trio stood on a quiet hill, watching the sunrise. For the first time in weeks, the air felt lighter. "What now?" Mia asked, her voice full of quiet hope. Darren exchanged a glance with Caleb, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Caleb nodded. "And we make sure no one like Royce gets to do this again." The three of them stood in silence, the sun casting golden light over a city that finally had a chance to heal. As the city begins to heal, Darren, Caleb, and Mia know their journey is far from over. Their story is a reminder that standing up to injustice takes courage, resilience, and an unbreakable bond. Together, they've proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, change is possible. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales of resilience, justice, and hope. Don't miss out on the next story. We've got plenty more on the way. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.